All right, we're up.
Good afternoon. I'm Roy Priest, the Chair of the Housing Opportunity Commission. I'd like to welcome you to the special meeting of the Commission for today, May 7th, 2021. I'd also like to introduce the other members of the Commission who are present with me today. Jeff Merkowitz, Rick Nelson, Chair Pro Tem, and Fran Kelleher, Vice Chair of HOC. Those are the members who are present at the present time. Today's meeting is called to discuss the project at Hillendale Gateway. Who on the staff is going to make this presentation? I'm sorry, Holly Hall. Ground lease. I'm sorry.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. For the record, I'm Kayreen Brown, Deputy Executive Director, and this request is approval of the sale of Holly Hall to Duffy Companies and authorization for the Executive Director to execute a ground lease with Duffy Companies of the Holly Hall property. And Zachary Marks will lead the discussion and we'll take your questions. Zachary, please go ahead.
Thank you. Zachary Marks, Chief Real Estate Officer. Really the best way to sort of look at this this request is really as a change to the structure of the existing partnership that's been in place for many years, and it is really to allow for a greater level of investment from Duffy, and also to put HOC in a more flexible position as it relates particularly to permanent financing as we approach actual construction start and construction financing in most likely in the first quarter of the next calendar year. And so, this first slide is really just a very short background, a very short history of the long partnership between HOC and Duffy on the Holly Hall redevelopment into what will be Hillendale Gateway. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. And so this slide really just sort of outlines those key pieces of the existing arrangement that change. The land valuation was already established in the existing operating agreement between Duffy and HOC, so that made that piece really easy. And so the key changes here is that Duffy would leave the approximately $550,000 in capital they've already invested in the deal. They'd leave that in, but all their subsequent investment would really be in the form of the acquisition of the land and subsequent lease back to the Hillendale Gateway development. And so what that would result in is sort of an immediate ownership change in HOC's favor to a little bit over 90%. And it would, albeit not in the same form as the combined contribution of Duffy, as you can see, goes up pretty significantly. And the main change is that it goes from Hillendale Gateway owning the ground fee simple to Hillendale Gateway having a leasehold interest for the 99 years. Based on our previous conversations and feedback from the commission, some of the key terms that are in this agreement is that HOC has a purchase option of the land if an extension can't be worked out toward the end of the lease. So the way that works is if there isn't an extension in place prior to 18 months before the end of lease, there is a mechanism in place for HOC to purchase the land at fair market value. So that's sort of that solution for the back end of things, in 100 years. And but also other purchase options include in the event Duffy wants to sell the land to an unrelated party, HOC has a right of first refusal there. And so Duffy plans on completing with your approval, of course, Duffy would plan on acquiring the land in the next few weeks. The rent would begin at that point, but it would be deferred until construction starts. and then simply be a cost of, it would be capitalized in the construction financing. HOC would get the proceeds, the 5.95 million, in a few weeks. So those proceeds would come to HOC. The rent would start accruing, but would be deferred until construction start again. We think Q1 of next calendar year. And there are no restrictions on, there are no material restrictions on HOC's ability to use this property, both for Hillendale Gateway, but also, 100 years is a long time. So any of those, any future uses, really it's simply compliance with law is about the only core standard there. So, so the primary change here is really, the fee simple ownership to the leasehold interest, and this is structured in a way that we think maximizes the benefit to both parties. But in particular for HOC, it's, it provides us some ready capital in the near term, which can be used for whatever the commission wishes to use those proceeds for. The next slide gets into a little bit more detail as to the specific legal documents that are at play here. So one is the purchase agreement for the property. The closing date of May 15 is probably not May 15. It's probably going to be a little bit after that, but we do anticipate the next couple of months would be the closing date. They'll put a deposit down. Duffy will put down a deposit of $100,000 down at the execution of the purchase and sale agreement. We discussed the purchase price, and so that's a pretty straightforward document. The ground lease itself, as we noted earlier, 99 years with monthly payments, and the following slide gets into a little bit more detail about how the rent adjusts, but we'll get to that in one second. And so, but the key here is that there's the right of first refusal purchase option. There's the end of term acquisition option. The prohibited use of a coffee shop is obviously because of the projected use of the Capital One site. Otherwise, there are no prohibited uses on the site. This would not include a restaurant that sells coffee. This is purely because of the likely tenant on the Capital One site next door. And so the structure would be triple net lease, as we've discussed. HOC's both the use and HOC's ownership, will flow through as it relates to some of the costs around triple net, but those will be the responsibility of the project. And then the last is the amendment, some amendments and restatements of the existing operating agreement. As we mentioned, this is a partnership that's been in place for a little while. So mostly these are restatements to just sort of memorialize things that have happened in the many years since that operating agreement got put into place. But there are some key amendments too, which is that there is was a change in the equity contribution and return structure as a result of most of Duffy's investment now going into the acquisition and lease back of land, and also to create a buyout option. So not on the land, but on the remaining 550 that Duffy's leaving in for the time being. HOC has an option to buy that portion out at the end of the construction stabilization period, so that as we're converting the perm, if you wish, we can own the property 100% at that point at permanent conversion. So that's yet another opportunity for HOC to, express its control if ultimately, you and your successors decide to do that. So those are the more detailed changes. And then the final slide is really just an exhibit around the benefits of this structure and also how the actual rent payments work. And so in order to provide a bit of a grace period for the project to get to stabilization, the rent is 4% of the property value Obviously, it starts at the purchase price of the 5.95. There are these 2% escalations on the rent each year to approximate CPI. And ultimately, every 10 years, there's kind of a true up of that inflation mechanism. So that's effectively what the escalations are for, or simply to try to track CPI with every decade, kind of a look back to true it up if necessary. Otherwise, it really is 4% of the value, the value as it's being adjusted, and then ultimately after the 5th year, it goes to 6%, and then it's just 6% of the property value per this calculation for the duration of the lease. So there are, we think we've built in a lot of really good flexibility around being able to really giving HOC the right to craft and adjust the deal as we progress. It's got some sort of highlight benefits here. One, it removes land costs from development basis, which is helpful, particularly given the use of tax credits on one of the buildings. It makes HOC, really the vast majority owner for the construction period, and puts it in position to likely be the sole owner of the improvements during the bulk of the lease. Duffy substantially increases the capital that they're committing to this overall development significantly, provides HOC some liquidity with the land sale. Ultimately, it could reinvest that money here. It could invest that money elsewhere. Obviously, that's totally up to the commission, and we're not making any requests here as it relates to those proceeds. And it accesses that capital at a fairly attractive rate of initially 4% and 6% after the 5th year. So ultimately, the requests here are on the final side, and it's really related to the main action is, of course, the disposition of the property, and then there are the 3 documents that put in place the lease back, which are the purchase and sale agreement to do the disposition, the ground lease, and then those restatements and amendments to the operating agreement to sort of bring the deal up to date, or the documents up to date to agree with the deal, and to also capture the introduction of this ground lease structure. Happy to answer any questions you have.
Yeah, Zach, if you could go back to page 8 or 12. Okay, on this slide, this is small, just editorial comment, where the word commencing is there twice. It's rent commencing. I know it's maybe
Yep.
it's to add drama to the statement, but it doesn't need to be there.
Yeah, I see it. Thank you.
On this particular chart, where it starts with a 4% value, and the bottom it says it escalates 2% per year, and then it says that 5 years there's a 6% reset. But if you're escalating 2% per year, you'll get to 6% before you
3 years.
before you get to year 5. I mean, I'm trying to understand this slide. It didn't make sense to me.
Yeah, so it's effectively what's happening is the 2% is on the underlying land value, and so the land value itself is going up by 2% per year, again to approximate the inflation, and the 4% and 6% are simply the calculations of the rent payment. So it's not an addition of it's not 4%.
It's just really saying that you estimate the value of the land is going to escalate about 2% per year, which you're saying.
Right.
That does not go into the computation of the rent payment.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That makes it clear, because I didn't understand that at all. And maybe there's some way you can clarify that, but that was just a point.
Yeah, dollars were probably better than percentages here in hindsight. So
yeah.
Yeah.
The next slide on the terms. I'm going the other way. Right here. On the ground lease, where it has payments monthly, I mean, why can't that be, the payments be made annually as opposed to monthly? I mean, that's administratively, monthly payments, you know, you are really quadrupling the number of payments that got to be made per month as opposed to just one annual payment.
I don't think they would. I don't think they're going to care, as long as I don't think they really care. But if you did, you know, if we did it, my guess is that, well, first off, part of the reason we don't want to do it monthly, I mean, we don't want to do it annually, is if something happens. So, I mean, I think a quarterly payment to alleviate some of the administrative strain would probably be, make a little more sense, if we're concerned about the administrative burden. But I don't know that it makes much difference.
Yeah, no, it's just administratively, because I mean, other ground leases I've done have been based on annualized payments as opposed to monthly. But I mean, whatever you work out, I mean, it doesn't change the amount that you end up paying
Right.
for that year. Just a matter of what you are dispersing the money. But just my own familiarity. Also, you noted in the narrative that this deal only relates to the multifamily building, not to the senior building.
That's correct. So one of the other points here is that, and this is captured in the to one of the amendments, the operating agreement, to just sort of memorialize this. It's really always been the business deal, but that really this is around the ground itself, and Duffy's participation is really in the multifamily building. The senior building is going to be financed with low-income housing tax credits, and it just doesn't, they neither wish to participate, nor does it make any sense for them to participate in the senior deal. So the senior building will actually just take an allocation of the ground rent payment, but otherwise doesn't have any Duffy involvement.
Okay, I was just wondering about that, because the ground lease covers the entire square footage of the site.
Right. Correct.
It includes both the multi-family and single family building.
Yep.
Okay. Of the $5.9 million that's being paid for the ground lease, how much do you anticipate of that will be needed as part of the sources in project financing?
We are, we are going through that right now in terms of getting the pro forma together, getting as much as we can, a sense of costs and all that sort of thing. So, I mean, in general, our working assumption is that we ourselves are not viewing the 5.95 as net available capital. So right now our placeholder is just for conservative sake, just say it all gets reinvested. But that's a decision we'll begin to bring materials related to the financing of the project over the next months. So at this point, that's why we're not flagging it for anything else.
Yeah, I only asked that question because one of the things you mentioned earlier as a benefit of this is that it releases money to be used for other properties. And so I was just trying to figure out, well, what is that amount of money you're talking about?
Yeah. And I think some of this is also just us trying to be respectful of the process, that, we haven't put anything in front of you and you haven't, so you don't have the opportunity to say one way or the other. We do get that money. Yeah, that money does come in as soon as the property sells in the next few weeks. So that money will be available, at least from a liquidity standpoint. At a minimum, it'll be there for just fungibly for the next 9 to 12 months before we start.
Yeah, I think, I know, commissioners, that the intent there was so that you all recognize that we staff aren't laying claim to it, and we can't lay claim to it. And so should you decide to allot it for something else, then it's obviously your decision. But, is there an equity component necessary? Sure. So.
Okay, those are my questions.
I have
Any
a
other
couple of
questions, Commissioners?
questions.
Okay, go ahead. Commissioner.
Yes, going back to the step diagram on the next page, I had a question similar to Chair Priest, but I want to just make sure I understand the answer correctly. The value of the land will escalate 2% per year. Is that correct? And be true upped every 10 years based on CPI.
Yeah,
So the
net of
2%
that.
will be an assumed estimate until at the end of 10 years you true up, and that resets the value of the land on which we pay rent.
Correct.
The amount of rent we pay will start as 4% of the value of the land at sale price. And then after year 5, it will go up to 6% of whatever that value plus the 2% are. So the point of the value of the land will be increasing based on 2% to true up to CPI. The amount that we pay in rent as a percentage of that value will go up once at the end of 5 years from 4% to 6%. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. I really just wanted to make sure I understood both moving pieces and how they related to each other.
Can I ask, you confused me a minute. The 4% on the 5.9 stays at 5.9 for 5 years. At the end of 5 years, it goes to 6%, but the value has not changed during the first 5 years.
I think it's that we're paying 4% for the first 5 years, but what we're paying 4% on changes every year by 2%. Right? So, whatever the 2% increase on the 5.9.
So the 2% is going to occur during the first 5 years too. Is that right? Oh, that wording was confusing because I thought it said something differently. Okay.
That's why I wanted to clarify. Thank you very much. So it's best if we all understand it the same way.
And do we true down if it's less than? That was
going to be my question. There's been, a lot of talk about inflation at the moment, but, we've been under 2% for quite a while. We may have a short-term burst of inflation. We'll see if it lasts longer, but so if it goes back to being under 2%, would we go down, or is this only going up if CPI exceeds?
Yeah, it's the greater of 2% or actual CPI, and then so at the end of year 10, if it happens to have been higher than that 2%, then there's an additional step up. If it's not, then it just keeps the 2% inflation. So there is not a clawback or anything like that in the event inflation is 1%.
It seems to me that that's an unfair advantage to us. Clawback is one thing, but if you're going to reset at 10%,
you could still reset without clawing back.
Okay.
You could reset for the next 5
years.
So
if it's lower, it will be reset at a lower value.
Right.
But we just won't claw back the. Is that correct, Zachary?
No, I think it's and if Eamon's on, he can confirm, but I'm pretty sure it's the greater of 2% or CPI. So it wouldn't drop. It would keep the 2%, but it wouldn't go up any further because inflation would not have been greater than that amount.
That's right, Jack.
Okay.
So that's not really truing up.
No.
Right.
No, it is truing up, but it sure isn't truing.
It is right. It is flowing in one direction. The only other piece that I would add that was part of this was the $5.95 million valuation was done at the beginning of the entitlement process. So, one of the things that they didn't ask for was a reappraisal at this point with the fully entitled yeah, as fully entitled land. So there's certainly some level of value there that they've also not taken advantage of. So I think that was part of the give and take here.
Is there going to be an additional look at CPI every 10 years?
Yes.
Or is it just at once?
Yep, every 10 years.
But it will never go down. I mean, I think that's a lousy provision.
Well, is there, I don't know. I've never seen a structure where the ground lease adjusts downward. I mean, just based on the fundamental principle that, you don't gain more land.
Well, I think though, Stacy, this land in particular being right on the edge of the Beltway, which there is plenty of question as to what may happen with widening, not widening, all kinds of different issues. The value of this piece of land could change downward based on government decisions that we have no control over. And
yeah,
so
that's it. I mean, theoretically it could. Unlikely though.
Actually, what about what is the value of the land once we build and have, that's the senior building, so 100% senior building on it? That land's going to be worth less than 5% because you've got controls on the use of that land. So in fact, the use to which we put the land reduces the value of the land.
You mean to say that, or you're saying that because we have done something less than or more restrictive from an affordability standpoint than could have been done, it's worth less than market unrestricted.
I mean, I'm guessing that, but who knows what appraisers do. It was appraised as a piece of land that at the most had a 12.5% affordable housing restriction on it.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Well, let me think here. Pre-entitlement, right? And I'm saying that because the entitlement process has caused a level of density from a multifamily and yes, a restricted senior standpoint that enhances the value. Yeah, it does. It enhances the value, right? Given what we've got there right now, it's an enhancement, and it's in an area where we've not had any. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Any multifamily or significant housing investment in, I don't know, 2-3 decades.
And
Can I ask?
Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner. I'm sorry.
Sorry. I mean, so I get, yeah, sure, there's a risk that the value of the land could go down. There's also probably a good chance that the value could go up given, the way, property values are going up these days and, could be projected to in the future. Does this protect us as well? I mean, if the base value that we're paying on never changes and it's just always that 6% after year 5, so even if the value of the land is going up more than 2% a year, we would not be paying more than that. Is that correct?
So it all comes down to CPI. So if CPI
right, but it's CPI versus land values, right? So land values may be exceeding CPI. Absolutely
right. So that's exactly right. So if CPI is trucks along at 2.5% for 100 years, land is only a small, owner's rent equivalent is equivalent rent is a very small part of CPI, and so it's very possible land is outpacing CPI. And the other thing I would say is that, and we're checking on the question. Honestly, the appraisal was done in 15, 16, something like that. So, but you know, even if we did impair the property, they're actually paying us, they're paying us the $6 million. So we are, you know, we're actually getting paid on that higher amount. I'm checking on what the affordable assumption was when we did the appraisal back then, but certainly, you know, the appraisal back then did not take into account the extra units that we're getting out of the prescient system. So there's a lot of stuff that, you know, just for the ease of getting into this, you know, both parties sort of leaned in on. But I think it's safe to say that the land is not worth less than 5.95 now, entitled for, you know, 100 more units than we thought we were going to get. And in fact, you know, being fully entitled in Montgomery County is unfortunately worth more than raw land. So I do think we're getting good value from where the base is starting.
Jack, there's nothing in the agreement that would mitigate against the ability to renegotiate your ground lease during your term of 99 years, is it?
So, I mean, we can, so, I mean, the main provision in there to sort of help us is toward the end, where if an extension can't be negotiated, we can step in and buy the land. We have that purchase option. So that's the one provision that really prevents us from you know, having the lease expire and have the building revert. But the second thing it does is it does sort of incentivize, you know, an extension of the lease, which would absolutely open those discussions back up.
So there isn't anything that prevents us from, as ground lessee and part owner of one improvement, actually, I guess part owner of all improvements, from asking lessor or requesting a renegotiation. No, there isn't anything that prohibits that.
Yeah.
And so,
because in my experience, in one transaction we had ground lease, it was with a senior building on ground lease, and in fact, the conditions in the marketplace just changed dramatically. And so when it came time for us to discuss the lease rate, we renegotiated the lease rate because we realized what was going on in the marketplace, and it changed the ability of the continuing affordability to be maintained if we didn't do that. So, yeah, I mean, so as long as we have the capacity between any parties to sit down and renegotiate terms, that's fine.
We have it, and remember, Duffy's are partners in the multifamily effort. If there were a significant decrease in value,
they would know well, we would know.
Right. I mean, but I have to tell you, unlikely. Like I can't point to a place in Montgomery County. Well, there's maybe one where there's a question, but I can't point to a definite place and time period where, even during the Great Recession, where a significant statistically significant downward revaluation has occurred and sustained itself for more than, you know, a year.
Yeah,
I can't.
Okay.
I have one other
And also,
question.
just to confirm, this is not in an opportunity zone, right? The opportunity zone is across the street?
Correct.
Okay.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Sure. The prohibition on the coffee shop, I totally understand. Is that limited to the existence of a competing coffee shop in 99 years? Much could change.
I don't think we did do that. Eamon, do you remember if it's just contingent upon that being the tenant in the Capital One site?
It's a relatively trivial issue compared to the one we just discussed, but
Yeah, no, that's fine. No, I don't think we.
I don't want to tie our hands any more than we need to.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is the at least the way Hillendale Gateway is designed, there's not really, from the retail perspective, the only
Right.
only initial retail is going to be really that big restaurant space at the corner. So it's probably
Right.
not lending itself that way anyway. But Eamon, do you know if there's any kind of provision that prohibition is conditioned upon there actually being a coffee shop as the resident or a tenant and there's in the Capital One site?
I'm pulling up the exact
Okay,
lease
thank you.
provision right now. So if you give me
Thanks.
1
Well,
minute.
rather than take a bunch of everybody's time with it, can we just say, let's ask if that can be part of it? I mean, I can't imagine why anyone would object.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
Okay, then let's move on. I don't want
Yeah.
to tie up everybody over that.
I would offer the observation. Many of us have lived in the county for long periods of time, and I can recall in my almost 50 years in the county that land value has ever gone down. So it's not reflected in my taxes.
Black swan events can happen, and I'm just concerned about levels of government that we have no control over, exercising eminent domain in that area based on highway infrastructure projects. So that's my only concern.
We do have in the document provisions around takings, eminent domain, and so forth. And so I think, Eamon, did we land that it does?
If the land is taken, a rent would be adjusted proportionally.
Yeah. So we do have we do have that eventuality as currently delineated, and obviously it's very early on. The state's sort of zone of impact would not impact Holly Hall, but obviously 100 years is a long time, and
Right.
And so we do have eminent domain and taking provisions in the document that do adjust the rent if we do lose a
Okay, that makes me
property.
feel better. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Question. I
Any
have.
questions?
Yes, on the right of first refusal is to an unaffiliated purchaser. Do the terms of the ground lease go with the title?
Yes. Yeah, and the sale of the land would not allow them to break the ground lease with us.
Okay. Okay.
Questions?
I think that was the only one I had.
The actions you are proposing, can you go to the last slide? Authorize executive director execute a purchase sales agreement in the amount of $5.9 million with Duffy Company for a sale of the HOC's Holly Hall properties. Staff to carry out the sale of HOC's Holly Hall property in accordance with terms of the purchase and sales agreement. Executive director to execute a 99-year ground lease as detailed herein on behalf of the Hillendale Gateway LLC. And the executive director to execute the Second Amendment and restated operating agreement for Hillendale Gateway LLC. That's in the form of a resolution. Which is resolution number 21-49. Pursuant to discussions that we have just recently completed, is there any action to recommend the approval of resolution number 2149?
I'll move that we approve resolution 21-49.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Properly moved and seconded that we approve resolution 21-49 related to the approval of the sale of Holly Hall apartment property to Hillendale PAD 2 LLC and authorization to enter into a ground lease with Hillendale PAD 2 LLC. Are there any questions? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any questions,
Aye.
Rick?
Yeah, I did have a question, but go ahead. I'll ask it afterwards.
Is there a question that will affect the motion?
I hope not. The question really is, under the recommendations, there's the recommendation executing 99-year ground lease. That's not HOC's action to take. That's Hillendale Gateway's action to take. Correct?
Correct. And so what we're looking for here is an authorization to do so on behalf of Hillendale Gateway as the manager of Hillendale Gateway.
But right now, HOC owns the property, not Hillendale Gateway.
Correct, but the ground lease would be entered into by Hillendale Gateway.
But we have. I guess the point I was getting to is we have a LLC for Hillendale Gateway.
Yes.
Aren't they the ones who have to authorize a 99-year lease?
Yes. So the two owners would authorize that, and so HOC is the one entity, has its entity that flows into the LLC. Duffy has its that flows into the LLC. Each of those entities would need to say yes, and so this is, as the sole member of HOC's owner in the LLC, that's the approval that you all are given here.
And we're authorizing the executive director to do this action on behalf of the Hillendale Gateway.
Right.
Commissioner Nelson, this is Asha. If you look at the second page of the resolution, you'll see the different capacities in which HOC is acting.
I see. Okay.
All right. So no other further question. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
There ain't no further business to come before the commission. I hereby adjourn the meeting of the commission at 12:47 p.m. Thank you all very much.
Thank you all.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, commissioners.